Okay, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody is safe and warm and dry. Starting to dig out after that snowfall. Uh, the topic I want to talk about this morning is something that I don't know how long it'll take us to discuss it, but to begin a discussion about that area of Jewish thought known as Kabbalah. Kabbalah is translated as mysticism. Kabbalah technically means the received teaching, which means somebody over to somebody else. It's a one-on-one type of thing. Uh, in terms of an introduction to Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism, let me preface it by saying that there are so many areas of Jewish thought that we need to master before we even begin to talk about mysticism. It would be wonderful if everybody studied and knew davening, studied the Siddur. It would be wonderful if everybody knew Chumash and Rashi well. It would be wonderful if everybody knew Chumash and all the Mefarshim, Mikros Gedolos, the Rishonim. It would be super if everybody knew all the Mishnayos in Shas. And if you can master all of Shas, whether it's Daf Yomi or studying it in depth, major, major accomplishment. And beyond that, you have all the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch and the questions and answers that rabbis received over these years. There are thousands of volumes of tshuvos. There's so much of Jewish learning to master, and we've had great, great gedolim who, in fact, have mastered it. We only use a fraction of our mind. And there are some gifted individuals who have capacity to use more of their mind, and these people are referred to as geniuses. And you have it in every discipline. You have it in math, you have it in science, you have it in literature and poetry, and you certainly have it in rabbinic literature. Great, great gedolim have mastered the corpus of Jewish law. Great poskim. And beyond that, you have the area of what we call mysticism, or Jewish theology, or Jewish theurgy, whatever you want to call it, that goes beyond all of the areas that I mentioned before. Great, great figures in Jewish history have mastered halacha and not got involved in Jewish mysticism because there's plenty to learn. Rav Soloveitchik was a halachist. He's Ish HaHalacha. Rav Moshe Feinstein were great poskim because they knew the halacha inside and out. You have many, many great rabbanim today here and in Israel who have mastered Talmud and all the commentaries. Yet, throughout history, you've had great, great individuals who, on top of all of that, also delved into the mysteries of the world, if you want to call it that. What came before creation, how creation took place, what is above and beyond the things that we normally understand. This is Jewish mysticism. And because it is only for a few, for the elect, for those who have mastered all of rabbinic literature first, you don't have that many great, great Kabbalists that we know of. And that's the key, because if you are a Kabbalist, you're not going to tell somebody you're a Kabbalist. If you study Kabbalah, this is not something you publicize. It's a very, very private endeavor. Because studying Kabbalah requires mastery of the entire corpus of Jewish literature, the rules governing its study are very, very clear. You're not allowed to study Kabbalah unless you have mastered all of rabbinic literature. Some say you shouldn't begin it even before the age of 40, because by that time we assume a person has mastered rabbinic literature. I'm not understanding why, but Maseches Chagiga. Maseches Chagiga deals with the Sholosh Regalim and the korbanos you have to bring. And I'm not sure why, but in Daf Yud Gimel, somewhere around there, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, it talks about what we call the esoterica, or the Kabbalistic teachings of two areas, Ma'aser Bereishis and Ma'aser Merkava. Maaseh Bereshis deals with how did God create the universe? We take it for a fact that God did create. We're living in a universe. God did create the universe. How did he do it? Now, again, the way God works is a very, very difficult understanding. The Rambam talks a little bit about it, but how does God doesn't function in the same plane as normal human beings? It's a different concept. It's a different dimension, I would say. How did God create the world? What came before the world? What were the steps in creation? That's Maaseh Bereshis, and that's an area that we are told we should not try to understand. Number one. The second area that the Gemara talks about is Maaseh Merkava. Maaseh Merkava talks about the heavenly chariot. Yechezkel Hanavi was taken to heaven in a chariot, which had all types of spinning wheels and sparks coming off it and all kinds of wild stuff. The modern Hebrew word chashmal, electricity, comes from the chariot of Ezekiel, of Yechezkel. What was this chariot all about? Those two areas are specifically designated as prohibited for us to study about it. It doesn't explain these areas. It just says you're not allowed to teach it. And if a person is worthy of studying it, the Gemara continues, you can't teach the Maaseh Merkava to an individual. It has to be in a group setting because some of the thoughts there are very, very difficult. And Rabbi Chia, Tani Rabbi Chia, when you teach it, you don't teach it straight out. If a person has knowledge of these things, you're not allowed to convey it Bishlei Musa in its entirety. It says, Avomosrim lo Roshe Prokim. You only teach them Roshe Prokim, I guess headlines or major categories. If they're capable, they'll figure the rest out by themselves. Amar Rab Zera, a Mosrin Roshe Prokim Elo Av Bezdin. You only give it to a person who is equivalent to the Av Bezdin, a great, great scholar, the number 2 man in the Sanhedrin. Or somebody who really, really wants to learn it. Now, the Gemara defines some of this, but it's not a simple process. It talks about how much you're allowed to reveal, how much you're not allowed to reveal. The Gemara quotes a fantastic passage that there's a what do you call it? The non-biblical books, Sfarim Chisonium, the apocryphal literature, those books that were not included in Tanakh. One of those books is called Ben Sira, and the Gemara quotes it. And the Gemara quotes Ben Sira and says, "B'mufla mimcha al tidrosh." That which is beyond you, don't seek to understand. U'mechusa mimcha al tachkor, and that which is hidden from you, don't investigate. Ba'meh shehoresa hisboneh. That is sufficient to know that which I've revealed to you. Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, Gemara, Mishnah, that you can study. Ein lecha esek b'nistaros. You have no business studying the hidden things. So there are things going on that perhaps we ought not to investigate. I remember very clearly when I was very young, my father said to me, stay away from Kabbalah. It's going to make you crazy. It was only later I figured out why he told me that. There were 2 twin brothers that somehow are related to my father's family. I'm not sure exactly how. One was a world-famous professor of philosophy, taught at Columbia University, Michael Wishograd. Very famous guy. Very famous guy. He had a brother who got mixed up in a group called the Malachim Society in Germany, in Berlin. And it really made him crazy, to put it in colloquial terms. 2 brothers. One became, I say, a great, great scholar. He's a member of the Breuer's community. And the other just totally lost it. Remained religious, but let me put it this way. I met him by accident many, many decades later. I was raising money for a sheltered workshop for Satmar Hasidim in Williamsburg, and I found him there one day. And what is he doing all day long? He's assembling ballpoint pens. That was their job. This was a man, an adult, who spent his days assembling ballpoint pens. Put the shaft in the thing with the spring, and so screw it up, put it in the box. He had lost it because he was involved at an early age in studies that perhaps he was not prepared to engage in. So Kabbalah can be very, very dangerous. And again, the Gemara in Hagiga, I don't know why it's there, but it says, Ein darshan b'arayos b'shlosha. You don't talk with the parsha of Arayos with less than 3 people. Separate discussion. The lo b'masa breishis b'shnayim. If you are teaching, if you're capable of teaching about creation, of cosmology, how God created the world, you can't do it with 2 students. It's one-on-one, in case one doesn't pay attention. The lo b'merkava b'yochid, and the masa merkava, the heavenly chariot, you're not allowed to teach at all. Ella imkein chacham u'meiv midato. Unless he is a brilliant person who can figure things out for himself. In other words, when you teach these things, you don't teach the entire subject. You give Rashi Prakim. You intimate certain facts, and if they can put all those facts together to understand the whole, then they're worthy of studying. If they don't understand what you're talking about, forget it. I remember one of my Rebbeim mentioned a Sefer of Kabbalah. There are many Sefer Kabbalah, and there's Ashkenazi Kabbalah, there's Sephardic Kabbalah, different Kabbalah systems. He mentioned a Sefer called Safra Disneyusa, the hidden book. Okay. So I went to the library to look it up. Fascinating book. The introduction is worth studying. The introduction is in Hebrew, written by the Torah Tamima, and he gives an introduction, and in the course of the introduction, he mentioned that the Vilna Gaon, in his study of Kabbalah, was able to make a golem at the age of 12, which is based on Kabbalistic teachings and Sefer in terms of Masa Breishis and so forth. At 12 years old, he made a golem before his bar mitzvah. He destroyed it, but he made a golem. Anyway, I looked at the book. I tried to see, what it's talking about. I was anxious to learn a little bit. And the only words that I could make out in this entire book was chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. Those are the only words I could understand. Everything else made absolutely no sense to me whatsoever, which is a good sign that I didn't deserve to be reading that book. In any event, the Mishneh Chagiga continues, you're not allowed to teach these subjects unless you are able to understand the topic from inferences that are mentioned. And he continues, Kol ha-mistakel ba'arba dvarim. Anybody who begins to inquire about 4 things. Ra'yu ki'ilu lo boli olam. Better he should never have been born. Mal-mala, mal-mata, mal-lifnim, umal-achar. What is above, what is beyond, what came before, and what will come after. V'lo shalochas al kavod kono. And anybody who is disrespectful, ra'yu lo shalo boli olam. So these subjects are something that people have to be very, very careful about because there is inherent danger involved. And then the Gemara tells us the key story. And this is the most important part of our discussion this morning. There's a key story in the Gemara Chagiga, Daf Yud Dal Lamed Beis, which gives us an idea about what this mystical tradition is all about. Torah is described as a pardes. an orchard, which you can understand theoretically in symbolic terms. It's an orchard where you can pick different types of fruit. But the word pardes, pei reish dalet samach, refers to the four ways that Torah is taught or understood. Pei, pshat; reish, pardes, remez, that which is hinted to; dalet is drash; and samach is sod, the hidden parts. Interesting. The origin of the word pardes, which means garden, what I has interesting something. Yes, interesting that the word pardes appears in many languages. In English, the word pardes became translated as paradise, which is the way that the term of Gan Eden is referred to in the Targum Hashivim, the Greek translation. It's paradise. But pardes here in this Gemara is the garden of God, but it's really the garden of Kabbalistic speculation, if I will. So the Gemara teaches as follows. This is the key text. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, 4 individuals entered the pardes. 4 great rabbis entered the garden, meaning they entered into the study of Kabbalistic thought. They went beyond, they were all masters of Torah, Torah Shabbat, Torah Shabbat Peh, and they ventured into the next level, that which is hidden from most people. Who are they? Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Elisha ben Avuya, known as Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. And it describes what they saw, I won't go into that now, but they were exposed to certain very mystical traditions. We're talking about Gedolei Hador at that time. Ben Azai looked upon it, studied it, and he died. Ben Zoma began to inquire, and he went crazy, lost his mind. Elisha ben Avuya became a heretic. So 3 out of those 4 had terrible results of engaging in this Kabbalistic speculation or thought. Rabbi Akiva was the only one who entered in peace and left in peace. Okay? So right away, that'll give us pause to think about, and when we talk about Kabbalah, by the way, I'm not talking about Madonna's Kabbalah or this modern Kabbalistic thought. And also, one of the dangers of it, Chabad Hasidim are theoretically involved in Kabbalistic thought. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, was a great leader, a great scholar, who also spoke in Kabbalistic terms. I knew one of the people, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe would speak on Shabbos, and he would speak for a few hours at a time, I would venture to say that out of the 1,000 people gathered at 770 Eastern Parkway, where their shul was, maybe a half a dozen understood what he was saying. In any event, as soon as Shabbos was over, there were 4 designated individuals who would try to reconstruct what the Rebbe was saying and write it down. And if you go into any Lubavitch home, you'll see volumes upon volumes of the Rebbe's sichos, of these discussions, which most people probably don't read. And if they do read it, they don't understand it. I knew one of the 4 people, Rabbi Sia Metzger, a great Talmud Chacham, who was Lubavitcher. And he was one of the 4 that would reconstruct the Rebbe's sichos. But Kabbalistic thought is not for everybody. And even if these 4 great scholars, Gedolei Hador, couldn't handle it, what do average people do? It's a very, very problematic issue. understanding God's divine presence, understanding how God functions in the world, how God created the world. Yet, if you never study Kabbalah, you can be a very fine Talmud Chacham, Paskin Shailus, give Shiurim, but it's an area. The Rambam wrote was a great halachist. Yad Chazaka, Perush Mishnayos, his Chuvos. He was a leader of the Jewish community in Fustat outside of Cairo. The Ramban, great, again, Perush ad Chumash. He wrote Perush ad Shas, also a Kabbalist. The Ari, interesting. Many people say you shouldn't start studying Kabbalah until you're at least 40 years old. The Ari died before he was 40. The biggest concern or biggest proof that this is dangerous, if you are aware, one of the false messiahs was known as Shabtai Tzvi. And Shabtai Tzvi became accepted as the Mashiach by a number of leading Rabbanim in Europe because his PR guy, Natan Hazati, based his whole existence on a twisted version of the Kabbalah that the Ari taught. A sefer called Drush HaTaninim, the explanation of the snakes. It's a very problematic sefer, but he was a brilliant Kabbalist, but he perverted the Kabbalah to make Shabtai Tzvi into the Messiah, and because it was done in such a brilliant way, using halakhic language and Kabbalistic language that the Ari used, many rabbis were taken in by it. Until ultimately Shabtai Tzvi converted to Islam. That's another story. Maybe at some point we'll talk about Shabtai Tzvi. But Kabbalah can be very dangerous in the wrong hands. And this is why, if you are indeed a Kabbalist, nobody knows it. You don't tell anybody. It's not something that's advertised. If you study Kabbalah, fine. If you gather one or two students to pass it on to them in hints and indirect instruction, also fine if they're ready for it. But they don't advertise. And there are a few people around who are secret Kabbalists. I remember I had the privilege once of spending some time with Elie Wiesel. I drove him from the airport once. And what do you talk to with Elie Wiesel? So we were schmoozing about different topics. And he told me that from time to time, when he was in France, he would study Kabbalah with a special rabbi that he knew. An old guy, and he would study Kabbalah with him. But his name was not known. And if I told you his name, nobody would know it. Because that's the nature of Kabbalah. It's a secret doctrine. It's something that it is not publicized. And it's only for the select few because it is a very dangerous area of learning, potentially. The Rambam tries to explain it. And the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, is not for the average person. And he explains in his introduction, he says, bread and wine are very healthy foods. We live on that. We drink wine, we eat bread, it keeps us going. But you don't feed bread and wine to a newborn infant because his system can't handle it, which is true. That's why you have baby food. Similarly, the average person is like that newborn infant. His system can't handle the knowledge of what we call Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah. So it's only for the initiated, so to speak. There's so much more to talk about. Let's see. There's now one of the problems with Kabbalah is in the wrong hands, it can sometimes lead people astray. On the other hand, if people just talk about it in general terms, it might be helpful. As I said, Chabad is very into Kabbalah. they quote certain aspects of Kabbalah, and the potential there for good, obviously, they do a lot of good. Whether the average Chabad Shliach really understands the deeper aspects of even what the Rebbe was teaching or what the Kabbalah was teaching, I'm not sure. But clearly, there is, as I started off in the very beginning, the studying of Chumash, the studying of the Siddur, the studying of basic Mishnayos and Gemara, and Mikros Gedolos, that's enough to keep most people busy. If you've mastered all of that, Malay Kreso, the Gemara says, if you've mastered all of the teachings of Jewish thought, and you still want to learn more, then maybe you can indulge yourself in learning a little bit about Jewish mysticism. But as I said, the Mishnah Megillah, fascinating Mishnah Megillah, which deals with which Haftorahs you read and which Parshas you read, says you don't read Maser Merkava as a maftir. It's from Yechezkel. Ein maftir me Maser Merkava. Because reading this publicly in the synagogue might lead people to try to understand what the Maser Merkava is all about, this heavenly chariot in which Ezekiel ascended to heaven. Ezekiel didn't die. He was taken by God to heaven in this chariot, and the description of this chariot with the sparkling lights and the wheels flashing and all that, it's difficult to understand, which is part of a Kabbalistic thought. For some reason, we don't follow that Mishnah. First day of Shavuos, we read Maaseh Merkava. And I'm not saying this is the reason we read it, but after being up all night long learning, most people aren't fully functioning at that time. So maybe they're not paying as close attention to it as they should when the Haftorah is read. So therefore, reading it, but it's a very, if you take a look at the Haftorah, I mean, I'm not telling you to study Kabbalah, but take a look at the Haftorah for Shavuos. It's a simple text. And try to understand what you're reading. And try to understand what the symbolism of that heavenly chariot is. Try to understand how God created the world. That's a whole other parsha. How did God, I mean, God didn't break a sweat. What were the mechanics of creation? How did that work? What happened to the worlds that God created to destroy before the world that we're living in now? Were there worlds before, as the Ramban talks about? There's a lot of stuff in Kabbalah which, if you're not ready for it, can sometimes literally make you crazy. Because if you're not, as I say, as the Rambam says, if you give an infant a piece of meat that he can't digest, it'll kill him. So the same thing is true. If you really are pursuing an understanding of that which is beyond normal human comprehension, it can sometimes have tragic consequences. So when people talk about Kabbalah, if they're talking about it, it's not real Kabbalah. Real Kabbalah, that which is studied, is done in small groups, in secret. You don't take out ads in the newspaper, a 5-week series on Kabbalah, as many Chabad places do. There are secular scholars of Kabbalah. If you want to get a little bit of an understanding of what Kabbalah is all about and the different strands of Kabbalah, the different teachers, Gershom Sholem was the pioneer in this field. Gershom Sholem was not necessarily religious. He studied in Berlin, then he came to Jerusalem, and he wrote many, many books on Jewish mysticism as an academic pursuit. He was not, to my knowledge, he was not a Kabbalist. I don't even think he was a frum person. And his students are now taking on his mantle, and they've a few other in Hebrew University are writing studies, and there are a few people that are writing about Kabbalah from an academic perspective. But the real Kabbalah is given to a few, and when the Mishnah tells you stay away from it, as I said before, halavai, we should know Shas and Poskim well, and that's a lifetime's achievement. If you can do that well, you don't need Kabbalah. If you've mastered all of Jewish literature and you understand it all very, very well, and there are a few people who fit into that category, then you may want to inquire about those things that are beyond normal human comprehension. How the world works. How do you animate a golem? The famous Maharal's golem in Prague, Czechoslovakia, which was, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Czechoslovakia in the 18th century, and Maharal created a golem. He created a figure out of clay, and he put the Shem Hashem under its tongue and animated it, and it fought off the anti-Semites and saved the Jewish community of Prague. And then when he accomplished his task, the Maharal took the piece of paper out of the golem's mouth, and he buried him upstairs in the attic of the Altneu synagogue in Prague. And that's where it lies today. However, that attic is now closed to the public, but the golem supposedly reposes in that attic. So there's a positive. But on the other hand, sometimes people create a golem and they can't control it. The Gemara talks about a golem. The Gemara talks about, there's a fascinating, and I'll end with this, there's a fascinating tshuva by Yaakov Edn's father, the Chacham Tzvi. The Chacham Tzvi got a question. We live in a far-flung community, and we only have 9 men. Can we create a golem and make a minion? All right? Now, the analysis of the answer is not important, but the fact that they believed that this was a possibility and that Chacham Tzvi took it seriously and he answered the question showed how widespread this belief was. People could create or animate a creature through mystical incantations of some sort for good, hopefully, or sometimes it'll be for evil. So you also have the whole notion of a dibuk, of a soul that is wandering through the next world, who hasn't found a place yet and is not ready to go to heaven or to the other place, and he returns to earth to try to work out whatever problems. All this is based on Kabbalah. And people will tell you today, they know of the dibuk, they swear their grandmother told them about it. So, as James Thurber once wrote, beware of things that go bump in the night. There are things that we don't always understand, but they're out there. And
Well,
yeah.
okay, we say that there's no such thing as real magic. So how do we explain a golem if that's not real magic?
Well, first of all, who says there's no such thing as real magic?
I've heard it multiple times from rabbis.
So most magicians perform sleight of hand. It's not real magic. But I'm not talking about magicians. There were Rabbonim, there were great Gedolim who were able to manipulate nature sometimes, according to resources. And you have some Hasidic Rebbeim were reputed to have done that as well. Although there's a humorous story about a Rebbe and his Hasidim were traveling through the woods on a Friday afternoon, and they hadn't reached their destination, and it was getting dark, and getting darker and darker, and they were still traveling through the woods. And a miracle happened. There was Shabbos to the right of them, Shabbos to the left, Shabbos behind him, and Shabbos all around, except not where the Rebbe was walking. Again, it's said as a joke, but the point is that behind the joke is the fact that there were great rabbis who could manipulate nature, who did, according to eyewitnesses, do certain things with the Shem Hashem. Knowing there is a book, you can buy it, you can read it, you won't understand it. There's a book that called Alpha Based Rabbi. There are a couple of books that talk about manipulating nature using Shem Hashem, and God has a variety of different names. Some of these names are 72 letters long. There are practical textbooks to teach you how to manipulate nature using Kabbalistic incantations. Now, can everybody utilize these incantations? Probably not. But they're out there. Again, it's a genre of Jewish knowledge that is not for the average person. And people have dabbled in it throughout history. The Gemara talks about a chavrusa, two rabbanim, who liked to eat a certain type of meat, and every Friday afternoon, when they were studying Sefer Bereshis or Maaseh Bereshis, how to create things using God's mystical names, they would create a calf every Friday, and they would slaughter that calf, and that would be their Shabbos meal, because they liked eating that type of meat. So they would create mystically this calf. Then the whole Gemara goes into the whole discussion. Does a calf that was not born from a cow, but created through manipulation of God's name, does it require shechita or not? It's a whole discussion about it. But the fact that they did this every Friday. So apparently the Gemara took it seriously, and throughout the ages, you also, again, the Ramban was a great Kabbalist. The Vilna Gaon did not write too much about it because, as I said, if you are a real Kabbalist, you don't publicize it. But none of his descendants were known to talk about it very much. They may have, and the Nefesh HaChaim, it's more philosophical and Kabbalistic. But it's an area of Jewish thought that is important, but not for the average person. But just be aware that it's out there. And the Gemara cautions you against studying it because not everybody is capable of understanding some of the concepts that are there. And that's why potentially it could be dangerous. Any questions?
Well, Ali.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a gentleman that writes an article in the Jewish press. I forgot, it's something on numbers. It's always number related. And he had a great line. What he said was, trying to understand God and his ways is like going to a movie half an hour late and leaving a half an hour early. You have no idea what that.
Okay.
Maybe a slight amount. That's how he visions how our understanding of God, because it's beyond our comprehension to fully understand it.
I mean, according to the Rambam, that's the definition of God. God is unknowable by definition. If you can understand God, God is not God. Now, chew on that for a while. He writes about, in Hilchos Deos, which is part of Mishnah Torah, which is supposed to be a halachic work, he deals with some of these concepts in Hilchos Deos, the beginning of Mishnah Torah, and he elaborates on it in much more detail in Moreh Nevuchim. And these are not subjects for the average person because you need a tremendous, tremendous background in Jewish philosophy and Jewish thought to even begin to understand the Rambam. So it's an area of Jewish study that is reserved for a very, very few individuals who either feel the need or have the capacity to understand it. But clearly, there's what to talk about. I mean, we live in this world. How did this world come into existence? Now, you have the astrophysicists who give you one explanation, and you have the Kabbalists who give you a different explanation. And somewhere in between, we might be able to understand what actually happened, maybe. But these are thoughts that, no, if you look at a blackboard in the laboratory of an astrophysicist, it looks like gobbledygook. All kinds of symbols and mathematical symbols and chemical symbols. It's a code. It's a code that, unless you are initiated into that code, you have no idea what it's all about. And the same thing is true of Kabbalah. Kabbalah is something that is passed on from a Rebbe to a Talmud one-on-one. And it isn't advertised, and it's not talked about. And it's like the Lamed Vav Tzadikim who maintain the world. They don't know that they're one of the Lamed Vav, and we don't know who they are either. So it's an interesting topic, only just to scratch the surface. But beyond that, we can't go because, I mean, the average person simply won't understand what it's all about. Halavai, as I said, we should all understand Chumash and Rashi, all the Mikros Gedolos, and Shas and Poskim. If you do that, you can say Dayenu. Any other questions, comments, critiques, observations? Okay. I've given you something to chew on.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Tomorrow's class will be on Zoom only. Rabbi Markowitz will giving it. That's tomorrow, and then Wednesday and Thursday, God willing, we hopefully will be live. Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Wally, you cleaned out the snow.
Plenty of snow.
Hey, Wally, what Rabbi Yudin would say, a woo-woo moment.
Ooh, is right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Have a good day. Stay warm and safe.
Be well.
Take care. Bye-bye.
I spoke to Tani.